I am delighted to introduce my dear friend Alta.
Yeah, Alta! Woo!
Alta and I were in one of the first women's liberation groups together in Berkeley. And she was known at the time for her poetry and her writing and her independent women's press writing, which she still is known for. And if we fast forward to the present and you see the film, She's Beautiful When She's Angry, you will see Alta has a wonderful portrayal there. And so I'm just really happy to introduce her. Good for you.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me? Is this working?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little
Okay.
closer.
I'm just going to tell a few anecdotes in recent
Move the mic
times.
closer.
And what they put me on as a performance. I asked Judy, what should I do? And she said, we're calling it a performance, do whatever you want. So, yeah, same thing. I'm just going to tell some anecdotes and it does bring up a question. The back of one of my early books says some of these poems were published in the Berkeley Bar. So my question is, Jane, were you the one who invited me to send poems to the bar?
I have no idea. I'm sorry.
Anyhow, I did get published in the Berkeley Bar. So I've been looking through the ones back from 1969, and that probably would have been the year. And so far I haven't met you.
Well, when did I meet you? If I hadn't met you yet, I would hardly have been able to encourage.
That's true. Right. So since many of you were here at the time, you may remember some of the people in this poem, like Roger Haynes and John DeBonis. I believe he was a councilman. And Bob Kroll, who was a reporter for the Berkeley Gazette. This is called True Story Number 5. Roger Haynes of Morris Kanowitz. What do people want anyway? Morris Kanowitz at Alta. What do you women want anyway? John DeBonis to Richard Crash. I don't think you hippies know what you want. Richard Crash to Alta. I don't think you chicks know what you want. Bob Kroll to John Thompson. I'm not against free speech, but I don't like your methods. John Thompson to Alta. I'm not against women's lib, but I don't like your methods. And then back in the day, we were supposed to look a certain way and act a certain way, and if we didn't, we would never get a husband. I had a high school friend who was 6'4", and she came to me. She said, they want me to have an operation to make myself shorter. I said, don't do that. That's very dangerous. Don't do that. She said, they say I'll never get a husband if I'm not shorter. I said, just go out with basketball players. And anyhow, I've seen her at high school reunions. She's very happy. She's still 6'4". She married a guy at 5'10", and they're still together. But every now and then, I get caught up in how should I look, how should I act. And this is one of those moments. I'm sure if I clean my ears, he'll love me. The right shoes are so important, don't you think? What 28-year-old man wants a dyke and hiking boots? All I have is these racing shoes. I'll have to wear black and white, keep the colors right. My skin's broken out again. whoever heard of a woman my age with pimples in this body? Well, nothing to be done after 4 pregnancies. It's not bad for a woman my age. I mean, why doesn't anybody love me? Maybe I should see the dentist. Oh, good grief, I can't live this way. How can a liberated woman beg for love? I can't do it. Can't do it. And this poem, someone, you know, it's hard for people to hear my voice or understand me sometimes. I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 34 years ago. But I read this poem on Jennifer Stone's radio show. You think weeping sounds bad, you should hear me laugh. Well, the guy who had trouble understanding me, he's from a different country and he had an accent. He said, I didn't know you whipped people. I said, I never whipped people. What are you talking about? He said, on the radio, you said whipping. And I said, it took me days to figure out. I said, weeping. Okay, Stuart, where's Judy?
Here.
Okay, Stu did my FBI files, do you remember? And he said he had never seen anything like it. It came back as 3 pages, and there was nothing on all 3 pages because they were blacked out. Every paragraph was completely black. So that said my name and the location and blacked out paragraphs. So I got my FBI files. That's it. And when I was living in the suburbs and doing Shameless Hussy Press, 2 guys in suits came to the door. And I answered the door, and they opened their jackets, and they had FBI thingies on their chests. And one of them handed me his card and said, we'd like to know if you'd like to work with us. So I looked at the card, and I looked at him, and I said, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a spy. But I've decided it's too dangerous, and no, I don't want to work with you. There is a bookstore that sells my books. The library did have them back in the day, but we can't ask libraries to hold these books that were published in 1971. All these years when there are new writers coming up all the time. If you really want a rare book, there are rare bookstores. And Bookshop in Temescal Alley has my books, and he can ask me for anything you want that you can't find. But please don't get angry at the librarians. They're doing a fabulous job. And the fact that they have all these Berkeley powders, when the rest of them, I mean, we were just using them to mop up spills. So this book is not rare. It was the last book published by Shameless Hussy Press. But by that time, those books were out of fashion. It was hard to get the bookstores to carry them. It may be in a few bookstores. I put it again in 3 bookstores last year. One bookstore gave the copies back. He said, I can't give these away. I went to the next bookstore. He said, oh, please take these. They aren't selling. I went to the 3rd bookstore, and this is Book Zoo, right off Piedmont Avenue in Oakland. A wonderful little store. He said, hey, do you have more of those books? They're flying out the door. So I have some of these books. In fact, I have a whole crate of these books in my car because it's half price just to encourage sales. This is the first poem I wrote to John Oliver Simon, who was my second husband, who taught me how to print. And I got the press, you know, when people break up, somebody gets something, somebody keeps something. I got the printing press when we broke up. And not walking across the schoolyard with her head bent. You would turn to me and laugh, and I would close my eyes to keep the beauty of you in my mind. It is difficult knowing you and doing without you. And then back in the day when we did this school around all we wanted, I took advantage of some of those times and some of those people. And I met this guy at Larry Blake's. It's called the Harry, the biker from Antioch. He keeps looking at me. What the hell? I walk over to his table, want to dance. His buddy pushes him out of the chair. Sure he does. Says the biker standing up. I guess so.
This is the conference, right?
He asks.
This is the conference.
He asks. You're not one of them women's liberators, are you? That's your ass. Say what? I said, you bet your ass I am. Harry the biker from Antioch shrugs and says, I can hang with that. It's been this last book that I'll read from. It is my most recent book. And I have a new system now, just so I don't have a carton of books hanging out in my car. I just do my book on a PDF. I send it to CopyNet, and when I run out, I say, can I have 15 more copies? So these are literally hot off the press. They came out Tuesday. It's my new book. It's called Another Moment. And that's from a quote by a baseball player, the Flying Hawaiian, whose parents told him, enjoy every moment, live every moment. So when I got diagnosed with MS, I was told I had 2 years to live. That was 34 years ago. Obviously, the information I got was incorrect. And so I wrote living well with a dread disease. And it's everything I've done to fight MS and to stay healthy. And a couple of years ago, I got diagnosed with cancer. So the second part is everything that grows can also shrink. So I've now had 6 surgeries, 6 months of chemo, 5 radiation weeks, and here I am.
Yeah.
Here's the book. And I'm going to read a couple of poems to Angel, the man I was with when I was doing Shameless Hussy Press. And here's a printout. Is Sean here? Thank you, Sean. Sean is the teacher, and one of his students did a wonderful article about Shameless Hussy Press. And it's available online. And I have 2 copies back here. Is there a problem?
Who's that speaking?
First, I'll say 2 anecdotes about Max. He was known for being penny pinching. And back in the day, I used to sell my books for 60 cents because I wanted women like me to be able to buy them. So I was selling Max a book in bed, and he handed me 58 cents. So I just held the book. And he said, give me the book. And I said, give me 2 more pennies. This went on for a few minutes. And finally, I pushed the 58 cents back at him and started to walk away. And he said, okay, okay. You he put 2 more pennies down on the table, and I sold him the book. The other story I have about Max is when I was leaving my husband, I had nowhere to go. I was staying in a friend's garage. There was no bathroom, no kitchen, no bed. So I was sleeping on a concrete floor, and obviously I didn't have money for food. I would go to the bed, and I would sit there for hours. And Max saw me, and Max fed me. So here are 2 poems from my 3rd husband, Angel. His name was Dan Scarry, classical guitarist, great guitarist. And he died 14 years ago. Valentine, 1964, for Angel. Excuse me. Valentine, 1964, for Angel. Impatient with illness, you lie on my side. I cannot help being ill, but you wish I would help it. You wake quickly with my cries, fetch water and ice, and white pills with labels you don't trust. I love you in this fever dark, your slender face, you're newly known to me. I wish to give all of me like this, and I could do nothing. Only know that I love you. Decades later, I tell Angel, sorry, I wasn't a better wife. He replies, all I remember is the love. Okay. Last thing I'm going to talk about, and I hesitate to talk about spiritual things because this is the Berkeley part. I met a man last night who said, I remember your poems in the bar being very spiritual. And I thought, that's a sign. I'm supposed to talk about this. So I have this book about Kuan Yin just to show people if you don't know who she is. She's considered a bodhisattva, which is a Buddhist who has come close to enlightenment and refuses to go on to heaven because she cares about humans and wants us all to get there. So she has refused to go to heaven, and she's still hanging around listening to our cries. And the reason she has become important to me, I was having chest pains, and I went to Alta Hospital, and the doctor said, I looked at your chart, I'll be back in 15 minutes. I'd already been there for 5 hours. 15 minutes later, he was still talking to another patient in the hall. I got up and I got dressed, and I said to the woman next to me, who was also having chest pains, I said, I'm not going to stay here. If I'm going to live, I don't need to be here. If I'm going to die, I'd rather die at home. So I went home, and I was in my bed, and I was really scared. I didn't know if I would wake up the next day. So I'm lying there in pain, and I'm crying. And the figure appeared at the base of my bed. And she's as tall as you. And she was perfectly white. And it was Kuan Yin. And I thought, I'm going to be okay, whether I live or die. And I went to sleep. But before I went to sleep, I said, wait a minute. I was raised Episcopalian. And she disappeared. Okay, folks, that's it.
Thank you, Alta.
I'm glad you're still here.
Yeah, thank you, me
It
too.
was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
I have 3 gentlemen. Here we go. And I have 3 bottles of water. This is our second panel of the day. It's a more academic panel. My name is Diana Stevens, and I first came to study the Berkeley Barb because I was here at the Berkeley Main Library doing some research on something. I can't even remember what it is now. I was in the middle of my master's degree, and I had to figure out what my thesis was going to be on. And I was just standing in line at the reference desk going, I wonder whatever happened to the Berkeley Barb. And so I asked the librarian, I said, could you please give me some copies of the Berkeley Barb since I'm here? And she said, what's that? And I said, well, it was, an underground newspaper, and it was printed here in Berkeley, and it circulated all the time. I saw it when I was 13 in 1972.
A person at the LA Public Library didn't even know what the LA Free Press was, and I had to get after them when they gave me some Wilshire Free Press from a similar year. So that's how out of it some librarians are about the 60s.
So I said, why don't you go back or call back into the stacks? I bet you the person who's back there with all your multitude books and papers has heard of the Berkeley Barb. So sure enough, they said, yeah, we have them actually. We have a bound set of them, 15, 20 volumes. And I said, whoa. And they go, which one would you like? And I said, well, I remember the one from 1972, but I don't remember the first one at all because I wasn't here. Can you bring me the first volume and then one from 72? So I opened up the first volume, and it was nothing that I recognized in that at all. It was strictly political. There were no dirty pictures. And that's what my 13-year-old mind was really attracted to originally. And I thought, wow, that's very strange. And then I opened the second volume, and there it all was in all its glory, the popular classifieds and picture ads. And I couldn't help but wonder what had happened, what had transpired. And that's what led to my study of the Berkeley Barb and how I came to write my thesis using it as a primary source, along with interviews from a lot of people that you all know, Judy and Raquel and Gar and John and Eugene, a lot of people that really just opened it up to me, and I continue to be interested in it. So, history. We're all part of history now, already. Even at this conference, it is now history. And it is an art form, not a science. I want to make sure everybody knows that, because as much as historians like to look at the facts, it's all subjective. Everything we say about the facts is subjective. So, a good historian keeps in mind the one fact, and that is that whatever we write about the facts is subjective. Even if you are there firsthand, and everybody that was there and present at the time writes about whatever event it was, you're going to see it from lots of different perspectives. So nobody has the whole story. No one person ever will. And historians and journalists and writers of all kinds, whenever you take history and use it in your art, keep in mind, yours is just one perspective. Okay. I want to introduce our panelists for today, but I need my glasses to do that. This is what happened when I wrote my master's thesis. I started wearing glasses.
What was it on?
The gender revolution, which is already an outdated term, isn't it? Peter Richardson is going to be our first speaker today, and he's a professor at San Francisco State University and the author of several notable books, including the first one I really read on this subject, A Bomb in Every Issue, how the short, unruly life of Ramparts magazine changed America. And recently, No Simple Highway, the cultural history of the Grateful Dead. Welcome. Ken Washburn. He's been very instrumental in the scanning and digitalizing of the Berkeley Barb, and we look forward to having it on our website soon. He is the founder of Azenconi Press. He teaches writing at Eastern Michigan University and is an author, editor, political organizer, and archivist. He is the editor of Voices from the Underground series, which he has in front of him. They are first-hand accounts of histories pertaining to the Vietnam War, the underground press, the feminist movement, and the American prison system. And Seth Rosenfeld, he's a freelance journalist and the author of the award-winning book Subversives. I looked for mine everywhere today so you could sign it. I couldn't find it, and so it's The FBI's War on Student Radicals and Reagan's Rise. Excellent book.
I read that.
As a staff reporter for the San Francisco Examiner and later for the Chronicle, Seth investigated several city and state agencies, culminating in his reporting on the FBI's activities at UC Berkeley during the Cold War and free speech movement. We'll be hearing from each scholar independently as they bring their particular expertise to the celebration of the contributions of the Berkeley Barb. When they're finished with their presentations, we will have a question and answer period that can last until 4 o'clock. All right, so let's start with Professor Richardson.
Thanks, Diana, and I'm really grateful to be part of this event and to learn so much about the Barb and its rich community and its robust history. And to better understand that history, I want to offer just a few quick remarks on the media ecology that the Barb grew out of and thrived in during its time. So in 1965, and probably most of you remember this, the Bay Area corporate media was, on balance, pretty conservative and undistinguished. The Nolan family, which figured heavily in national Republican circles, owned the big East Bay daily paper, which was the Oakland Tribune, which I happened to deliver during my misspent youth in the El Cerrito Hills. The San Francisco Examiner was a Hearst paper, and the Chronicle was a colorful but not really a major daily. So in part because these corporate outlets weren't exactly hitting it out of the park, it created a lot of room for alternative journalism to flourish. And the Barb, of course, helped set the stage for that. And by the late 60s, this whole area, this region, was kind of teeming with alternative publications and underground publications. And they included, some of the names have come up last night and today: the San Francisco Oracle, the Black Panther, San Francisco Express Times, Good Times, It Ain't Me, Babe, which came up earlier today. Dozens, and at least a dozen others during that time. So for purposes of comparison, I just want to pick out 2 other publications, Bay Area publications that launched at about the same time as the Berkeley Barb. And one is Ramparts magazine, which started as a Catholic literary quarterly in 1962 and quickly became an influential San Francisco muckraker. And the other is Rolling Stone, which was founded in 1967 by 2 Ramparts contributors, both of whom had roots in Berkeley. Both the Barb and Ramparts focused on free speech, civil rights, and the Vietnam War. And as I say, the corporate media's weak reporting on these stories created the demand for some alternative content. And you can compare that situation to the early 2000s and the run-up to the invasion of Iraq, for example. I mean, corporate media totally whiffed on that one. And they almost uniformly got it wrong. And by missing that story so badly, it created room for places like Daily Kos, also Berkeley-based, to grow and flourish and to attract an audience online. So the corporate media also didn't do that much better on the housing bubble. That's the other major story of the last decade. And most of the corporate outlets totally missed it. So the business press was sort of noodling out the usual stuff right up to the moment that the Wall Street grifters crashed the global economy. So if any argument were needed for an alternative press, those are two good ones. The two biggest stories, huge resources, huge press corps, both in the Pentagon and on Wall Street, can't get the story. And it's not like nobody got the story. A lot of alternative voices were getting the story exactly right. So, I want to sort of mention that as part of what's required for a healthy media ecology. Anyway, back to the 60s. So the Barb and Ramparts were cultivating relationships with the Black Panther Party. Both featured stories on the environment, feminism, and national security state. Both were irreverent, iconoclastic, and both found large audiences. I mean, as we heard last night, the Barb's audience exceeded 90,000 when The Nation magazine, which celebrated its 100th birthday in 1965, was hovering at around 55,000. So that's big, and this is a local underground paper. The Rampart circulation was even bigger, it was about 250,000 at its peak. So even the surnames of the two editors were similar. So the editor of Ramparts magazine was Robert Shear, who also lived in Berkeley. In fact, when I asked Bob about the Berkeley Barb last week, knowing I was going to come here and talk about the Barb, I said, what was your awareness of the Barb when you were editing Ramparts magazine? And he said that when he was going through his divorce here in Berkeley, the judge mixed him up with Max and referred to him as a pornographer. So that was one of the things that he remembered about that time. Okay, so there's a lot of similarities. What were some of the differences? From the beginning, the Barb had a local focus and a small budget. And that's come up a lot, I've heard today and also last night. But it turned out a lot of national news was happening here, and both of the publications turned that to advantage. Ramparts also published a string of investigative and whistleblower pieces, though, that had national and international significance. The two publications looked very different. So the Barb had striking illustrations and influential comics, but design was never its strong suit. Ramparts, by comparison, had a very attractive and professional. It was a slick. It was not an underground publication. And that was the whole point from the outset, was to have a radical slick and to see what could be done with that. And what that did is it really extended its reach and power of the stories that it did. For example, Martin Luther King was in an airport waiting to fly on a vacation. And he started flipping through Ramparts and he saw a photo essay on the children of Vietnam. And that was when he decided to oppose the war publicly for the first time. It wasn't a popular decision. People tried to talk him out of it as advisors. But that's the kind of influence that a magazine can have on a national character on the national stage like Martin Luther King.
Did it start as a Catholic magazine?
It did, yeah. Catholic Literary Quarterly. So the business models were very different. I mean, as I've learned, the Berkeley Barb didn't even have, it sold to vendors for a nickel, and it didn't even have a dedicated checking account. Ramparts was spent lavishly. They burned through a couple private fortunes, essentially. $600,000 here, $700,000. Pretty soon you were talking about real money. And but weirdly, it was the Barb's business model that had some unexpected influence. So Diana mentioned the book that I did on my more recent book on the Grateful Dead. Turns out when the Dead were thinking about starting their own record label, they were thinking about the underground press as their business model. And they were actually kind of toying with the idea of distributing their records through ice cream trucks. Because they didn't really think that the mainstream record labels could sell records. They didn't think they were that good at selling records. And it wasn't even really required. They just had to get it out to the people who were most likely to buy it. And there were all kinds of alternative ways to distribute records. It turned out it didn't work. But that was, you know, they had no faith in the more traditional system. It never had an advertising base though, and political magazines left and right struggle with that. You can see that, and the Barb, meanwhile, of course, had sexual content and ads that had to do with sex. That was the lifeline. You know, when that was taken out, the Barb kind of shriveled out, and you can still see that on the internet, right, with its kind of ubiquitous clickbait. Also in the alternative weekly world today, along with dispensaries. That's where the ad revenue seems to be coming from. Yeah. So Ramparts folded for the first time in '69. They had a situation that was a little bit like the split between the Barb and the Berkeley tribe. David Horowitz and Peter Collier ousted Robert Scheer. And they went out of business for good in 1975.
And they moved to the right politically.
Those two did, yeah. So they closed for good in '75. Mother Jones picks up the torch, and the Ramparts mailing list. And of course, they're still in business, basically, using a kind of philanthropical model. Okay, let's throw Rolling Stone into the mix. Its founders, as I said, Jan Wenner and Ralph Gleason, both had Berkeley roots. Gleason lived over on Ashby, wrote for the Chronicle, also for Ramparts, helped Jan Wenner start the magazine in 1967. In terms of production values, it was a kind of cross between the Barb and Ramparts. It was on newsprint. They lifted their design directly from Ramparts. They had no design experience, so they just took Dougald Sturmer's design from Ramparts with his permission. They had an ad base though, because record companies were very happy to advertise in Rolling Stone, so they had a more durable business model. But they always did political stuff, you know, starting with, you know, Hunter Thompson, and then they did their first big investigative piece really was the Patty Hearst underground story that came out in the mid-'70s. But it's recently, Rolling Stone has recently won 2 Polk Awards in the last 5 years. That's a pretty big deal for their political content. But its politics have never been radical. I mean, it's basically a kind of reliable supporter of the Democratic Party. And and as it loses its ad base, you know, music is produced and consumed and distributed in different ways now. It's lost the record company ad revenue, and they're sexing up the content. And if you don't believe me, go look at the Kim Kardashian cover, like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, Kim Kardashian, queen of the clickbait. And so that's the direction that they're heading. I mean, they've always been more than a music magazine. It's been a long time since they've been mistaken for a countercultural one. Right? It's basically a celebrity magazine. So for me, those 3 histories raise, you know, the story of the Barb and Ramparts and Rolling Stone raise one question with real force, and that is, how are we going to have vibrant political journalism in this country? Right? So I think we should start by recognizing that political journalism has never paid its own way, here or anywhere else. Right? In the 19th century, the federal government supported the newspapers with space ads and with preferential postal rates. And if you look at it per capita, in today's dollars, that subsidy comes out to about $30 billion a year. Okay, right now we spend about $465 million on all public media. Okay, that's about 1/20th of what's spent per capita in Canada, and about 1/50th of what's spent in Great Britain per capita. Britain gets the BBC, we get Fox News, hosting, you know, the presidential debates of one of the 2 major parties in the country. So keep that in mind. So during the 20th century, I mentioned the 19th century, during the 20th century, of course, advertisers subsidized political journalism. I mean, look at the Chronicle, for example. It bundles its political content with other kinds of content, sells ads against it, and that's how they keep political journalism going. But the political journalism was always subsidized, right, by the advertisers. And when these new kind of digital forces are unleashed, they break that business model. And probably for good, right? I mean, we've been talking now for about 15 or 20 years about the new business model for serious political journalism. We're still waiting, right? It's saturated with techno-optimism. Somehow, the forces that broke the old model are going to create the new model. We're still waiting. Nothing is happening at the scale that we need, right? And it probably is not going to, because it never has done that anywhere. So the obvious solution, I think, is to acknowledge that political journalism isn't just another product, right? Or rather, it's just another product in the same way that oxygen is just another gas. Okay, we need it, we know we need it. The question is, how are we going to pay for it? The market's not going to deliver it to us in the quantity and quality that we need. And once you put it that way, I think it's pretty clear that we need some bigger public investments. This is not news to anybody in any other country. It's one of those things that only we are stumped by. Because in many, many other countries, they've figured out how to make sure they have political journalism. And for a healthy media ecology, I would argue, you need large organizations, news organizations. Doesn't matter whether it's a newspaper or whatever. You just need large news organizations, and you need smaller, scrappier ones, for reasons we can discuss if you like later. But the solution we have right now, where news organizations, large and small, are crumbling, while the federal government spends more money on military bands than on all public media. Okay, that situation is totally cuckoo pops. That's never going to work. And we actually spend something almost 10 times more on Pentagon PR than we spend on all forms of public media. So, we spend more on Pentagon managing of the news than we do on public news gathering. So to me, that's a big problem. So let me end with a call to action. Please consider challenging at every turn the assumption that for-profit corporate media is the best or most natural way to do political journalism in this country. And that sort of challenge, I think, is the logical outcome and maybe the best response to the history of the Bay Area's iconoclastic publishing, including the Barb. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Ken Washburger.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Diana, and the Reunion Committee for putting together this amazing event. For this outer towner of Ann Arbor, it's pretty surreal being here. But it's wonderful being here. When I was beginning to compile and edit histories of different underground newspapers for my Vietnam, my Voices from the Underground series in the late 80s, early 90s, one of my friends, who himself had been a veteran of the underground press, asked me how I could spend so much time on such an esoteric topic. Fortunately, I had no idea what esoteric meant.
A little bit further away from you.
So I was undeterred. But since then, it's become a major amount of my research. And one of my great discoveries during that period, when I was working on the first edition of the series, was that my contributors were all still politically active. Now this doesn't seem like a big deal, but remember we were in the, it's only 15 years after the war ended, but already the country had veered dramatically to the right. We were living in Reagan's America. A good percentage of our generation had become yuppified. They weren't telling their kids about what they did during the war. Even though the Vietnam War produced the broadest, most diverse anti-war community in the history of our country. People who had been part of that era, they weren't talking about it anymore because they were scared. They were scared of losing their job. This was the atmosphere that our country was in 15 years later. So I was really pleased that my contributors were active. And of course, I'm looking out here right now, 25 years later. And I know that all of you are politically active, and it's a great feeling, and I believe that the country is coming around again. I know we sometimes think it's worse than ever, but I see good signs, and we were persistent, we were patient, and of course we were right all along. And so it's nice to see them coming in our direction again. But another discovery I made, and our friend Jerry Rubin said it best, we are everywhere. Underground papers were everywhere during the Vietnam era. They were everywhere. They were in the urban, suburban, rural, ghetto, barrio, tribal, and other communities in every state of the Union and in countries around the world. They represented the gay, lesbian, feminist, black, Native American, Puerto Rican, Asian American, Chicano, senior citizen, high school, campus, community, psychedelic, anarchistic, counterculture, new age, prisoners' rights, rank and file, Southern consciousness, and other alternative voices of the period. There were underground papers in every branch of the military, every branch. There were over 900 underground papers that were published by or directed to members of the military. Support the troops? You're damn right we supported the troops. Nobody supported the troops like we did. Underground papers, they were everywhere. And each underground paper addressed the unique needs of its own audience, but they were all united against the war. It was amazing. So here we are at a major celebration for Berkeley Barb, one of the legends, one of the original 5 members of Underground Press Syndicate, the first countercultural network, nationwide network of underground papers. My hat's off. My hat's off to all of you folks out there who were part of this history. You are an amazing, remarkable family of legends and heroes and friends, and I'm really honored to be here. I'm really honored. And congratulations also to those of you from the 80s and 90s who are carrying on the struggle that we handed off to you. You are the new leadership, and we're still there. We're not retired yet. We're still, we're still. We got goals to achieve, fantasies to live, as Abby would have said. Live our fantasies, remember. But the torch has been passed. Our challenge now is our mission is to record our stories, to share them with the younger generation, to share our lessons and our struggles. And here's what you're going to find. Here's what you're going to find when you begin talking to the younger generation. Most of them have no idea what we did back when. They have no idea. A journalist wrote to me recently. She said it's interesting how little the underground press plays in the popular conception of the 60s and the 70s, despite how vibrant the scene seemed to be. Now we can argue about the reasons, but he's right. He's right. Even political bloggers who are our natural heirs, for the most part, they have no idea of their own political roots. They have no idea. So here's my challenge to all of you. Okay, we're in the middle of a celebration. I'm giving you a challenge, but here's our challenge. Record your stories, okay? Now. Record your stories now. Produce movies, publish books, post blog entries, write letters to your kids, and get your stories down. Because if you don't write your own stories, someone else is going to write them for you, and they're not going to be the stories you remembered, or the stories you want others to remember. We're here at the Berkeley Barb reception. Berkeley needs a history. Even if it's an anthology of multiple contributors, get it out now. Get it down there. Teach your children. Teach your children and your children's children. I'm pleased at the reunion committee for inviting me here to share my current adventure in preserving the voices of our generation, including the Barb. When we're done, we will have digitized over 1,000 titles, representing over 750,000 pages of exact keyword searchable digital reproductions of underground alternative and literary newspapers and magazines from the 50s through the 80s. including all the genres that I mentioned earlier. We even have 4 papers published by the FBI to sow dissension in the movement. And we could do a lot more if we had more funding. So all of you rich heirs out there, I know you're sitting here somewhere. Let's talk. We need to talk because we need more funding. Trina Robbins in her keynote talked about the role of women in the underground press. The digital collection already has approximately 120 feminist and lesbian newspapers, including, of course, the Bay Area's own It Ain't Me Babe, which was the first nationwide feminist underground newspaper, and one, of course, that was honored to carry many of Trina's covers and cartoons. Sometime after January 2017, the collection is going to go into open access, which means that it will be freely available to anybody through a simple keyword search. Right now, while we're in production, it's only accessible to patrons of our supporting libraries. Fortunately, Berkeley, and in fact the entire UC system, is a supporter. So if you have access to any of the UC libraries, you can get into it. And if not, if you don't have access, 2 things. First of all, talk to your librarians and tell them to get on board. And second of all, we've put aside about 24 titles, I think 22 to be exact, that already are going to be open access immediately, so that people who don't have access to the complete collection can at least get into it and see what it looks like. And in honor of this celebration, one of those titles is the Berkeley Barb. So it is already immediately in open access. Now, it's not complete yet. It's not complete yet. We're building it. One of the features of our collection is we're working with a growing team of sourcing libraries. What they're doing is they're sending us complete, original copies of newspapers that we scan and digitize and return to them in good shape. By working with multiple libraries, we're able to create complete runs out of titles that the libraries only hold in part. And this is going to include the Barb. We're working with a growing team of libraries, but also a number of individuals who are actually sitting right here are sending us copies from your garages, your attics, wherever you're holding the old issues. And we're putting together, and by the time we're done, we're going to have, as far as we can see, the first complete run of the Berkeley Barb. And it's going to be all keyword searchable. That's just very, very exciting to me.
So what's the search keyword for the collection?
It's we're actually just changing platforms right now, but if you search for voices.revealdigital.com, if you've got one of the flyers that I've been handing out there, it's got the information on it, so grab that. But you can get into it through that. I became aware of the Barb before Kent State, which is when I became political. I was visiting my brother who was living in Manhattan Beach, and I was listening to Johnny Rivers singing Going Back to Big Sur. I realized that Big Sur was only 400 miles north on Highway 1. And so the next morning, I packed 2 days worth of clothes and camping gear into my laundry bag, slung it over my left shoulder, and rode my right thumb up Highway 1. It was 1969, and I remember that because it was the first of what would turn out to be 10 years worth of hitchhiking adventures. And I learned later on that that was the year that Jack Kerouac died. So naturally, I drew a psychic connection between 2 generations of hitchhikers. But 3 rides took me out of the Los Angeles area, and then I got picked up by 4 long-haired hippies, 2 male and 2 female, who were driving, cliche alert, a VW microbus with multicolored swirls and shooting stars painted on the side. There was so much smoke coming out of the car that I was high by the time I sat down. Somewhere before I passed out with a big grin on my face, someone handed me a copy of the current issue of the Barb. I'm pretty sure that's why I had a grin on my face when I passed out. Later, to this kid growing up in the east side suburbs of Cleveland, who had not yet achieved political consciousness, the Barb was outrageous with its graphics and its cartoons and its layout, and it told me that there was something different out there, something that I couldn't ignore. Later, when I became political at Michigan State, I began to read the underground papers there, including The Paper, which was one of the first 5 members of Underground Press Syndicate. And that's when I discovered that the Barb also had been one of the first 5. Berkeley was the epicenter of the counterculture. The Barb was the voice of Berkeley. The 60s was an amazing era, one of the most colorful, stimulating, significant, and divisive periods in our young country's history. I've never been one to apologize for the supposed excesses of the period. And I'll bet none of you are either. Were we excessive? Of course we were. We changed the world for the better. And the world is continuing to get better because of what we did then and what we're still doing. So my congratulations to the Berkeley Barb for being a major player in that historic era. Thank you.